What if I told you there's a 2-mana commander that turns every creature into a mana dork? Most decks ramp with artifacts or spells. This one ramps with humans. Katilda, Dawnhart Prime. Katilda is one of those unique commanders that look really simple on the surface, but the more you play her, the more you'll realize how broken this card really is. For just 2 mana in Selesnya colors, you get a creature with 3 unique abilities. And one of these abilities completely changes how you approach the game. Her first ability essentially turns every human you control into a mana dork, allowing you to tap them for 1 mana of any of their colors. And that ability alone is the reason why Katilda is such a powerhouse of a commander. You're effectively getting a Cryptolith Rite in the command zone. And this ability means that even your smallest 1-drop human creatures can now produce mana. And once you have like 3 or 4 human creatures on the board, this deck just pops off. You can just start chaining spells back to back because every human you play will fuel into the next. And you'll just keep doing this until your board turns into a self-sustaining engine of creatures and mana. And this is where Katilda stops feeling like a regular human tribal deck and starts feeling more like a human storm deck. This deck is not about playing a ton of anthem effects or human lords to buff up our army of humans, but instead this deck will swarm the board really early, generate absurd amounts of mana, and then closing out the game by dropping one of our big win con cards really early in the game. And that first ability alone already makes Katilda into one of the strongest Selesnya commanders ever printed. But on top of that, she even has 2 more abilities. Her second activated ability allows us to pay 6 mana and tap her to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. And while this ability isn't our main game plan, once the engine is online, it is a fantastic mana sink. Since this deck can generate absurd amounts of mana, this becomes a legitimate way to turn your army of small support creatures into huge threats to take your opponents out of the game with. You won't be using this ability very often, but when you do run out of cards to play later in the game, it's a reliable way to keep the pressure on and utilize all the mana you can generate. And before I forget, she also has a third ability. Katilda has protection from werewolves. And I suppose since it's almost Halloween by the time this video releases, if your friends are brewing some janky werewolf decks, congratulations, because your commander is basically invincible for this month. All jokes aside, Katilda really represents one of the most explosive and efficient ramp engines ever printed for Selesnya. And she does it in the coolest way possible, turning all of your creatures into resources and allowing you to storm off with humans. Originally, I tried building a budget version out of this deck, but it felt way too restrained. So instead, I decided to go with a no budget version to be able to showcase how strong of a card Katilda really is. And trust me, once you see how much mana this deck is able to generate as early as turn 3, you'll never look at human tribal the same way. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card that I decided to include in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. And this video is divided up in 6 categories: the human core, card draw, the win conditions, support, protection and interaction, and the lands. And let's get started by talking about the most important section: all of the core humans we play in this deck. Since everything in this deck revolves around the humans that enable us to generate a huge amount of mana with Katilda. Some of these humans will produce us extra tokens, some provide really good utility, and some of these humans even slow down our opponents. And what all these creatures have in common is that they will turn our entire battlefield into a living mana battery. And I'll start by going over the 1-drops because these play a vital role in the deck. Champion of the Parish, a classic staple card used in many human tribal decks. It's a 1-drop 1/1 creature that whenever another human enters a battlefield under your control will get a +1/+1 counter. Now, even though this creature doesn't come with any utility abilities, it will grow into a huge creature body over the course of the game, since we do play a total of 44 humans in the deck. And even whenever you generate human tokens, Champion of the Parish will trigger and he will get counters. And at some points your opponents will just have to use removal on this 1-drop body, because otherwise they will just lose the game to a 15/15 Champion of the Parish. And now that we're talking about the 1-drop creatures, I also want to give an example of how crazy these 1-drops can be in this kind of Katilda deck. Let's say you drop a land and play a 1-drop on turn 1, and then on turn 2 you follow up with another land drop and Katilda. You can then use the first 1-drop creature to play another 1-drop, and then on turn 3 you can just play an additional land and you will now have 6 mana available to you. Because now you will be able to tap the 3 humans for mana thanks to Katilda, and you also have the mana from your 3 lands. Yeah, that's right. In this deck you will always have 6 mana available to you on turn 3 when you have 2 1-drops, and whenever you only have 1 1-drop creature in your opening hand you will always have 5 mana on turn 3, which as you can imagine will enable some really game-changing plays really early in the game. Benevolent Bodyguard. This 1-drop creature can be sacrificed on instant speed to give any creature you control protection from a specific color until the end of turn. As you will see later in the video, Katilda really is the core value piece of this deck and we want to protect her at all costs. Because once your opponents see what this deck can really do, Katilda will be a removal magnet. And this card just solves that problem. Functions as a body you can tap for mana, and it functions as a fantastic way to protect Katilda from any sort of spot removal. And you can also use the protection effect offensively. If you for example have a 15/15 champion of the parish on the battlefield, you can just sacrifice this creature, give it protection from a specific color, and your champion of the parish will essentially be unblockable. Talking about protection, Mother of Runes. And she essentially has the same effect as the previous card, but instead of having to sacrifice a creature, we can just tap her instead. Another awesome human body we can use to protect Katilda or any of our other value humans, and another way to just sneak some combat damage through. Saga Ascendant, a 1 mana 1/1 lifelink creature. But for as long as you have 30 or more life, this creature will get +5/5 and flying. And as we all know, in a game of Commander, we get to start at 40 life. So Saga Ascendant is essentially a 1-drop 6/6 flying lifelink creature, making it into one of the most broken 1-drops ever printed in the entire Commander format. This card does come with a really hefty price tag, but trust me, it's totally worth it. It will always be a staple card in the Commander format. Planar Guide. For 4 mana and exiling this creature, we get to exile all creatures on the battlefield. Then at the end of turn, all creatures will just return to the battlefield under their owner's control. And this effect does a couple of things. In a creature-based deck like this one, board wipes are our absolute enemy. And for as long as you can keep the 4 mana open and you have this creature on the field, you are basically immune to board wipes. Because whenever your opponent casts a Supreme Verdict or a Farewell, for example, you can just activate this ability, exile all your creatures, a board wipe will resolve, no creatures will be destroyed in the process, and then all creatures will just return. And since the creatures leave and then enter again, it will also re-trigger all the enter the battlefield effects of any of those creatures or any enchantments or artifacts you have on the battlefield. If you have a champion of the parish, a ton of humans will re-enter and you will get a huge amount of counters. If you for example have a guardian project on the battlefield, you will get to draw a huge amount of cards of this effect, and cards that do something on ETB like a witch enchanter will re-trigger again. Just be warned, your opponent's creatures will also be blinked by this effect, so they also will get all their ETB triggers again. You really don't want to be using this card whenever your opponent has an Italy on the battlefield, for example. Recruitment Officer. For 4 mana we get to look at the top 4 cards of our library. Then from amongst those 4 cards we get to reveal 1 creature with mana value 3 or less, and we get to put it into our hand. And since we do play a ton of low mana value humans in this deck, you will always be able to get 1 card of this trigger. Now paying 4 mana for this type of effect usually isn't that great of a deal. But thanks to Katilda you will always have a huge amount of mana, and we do actually need mana sinks like this card to utilize all of the mana we can generate. Seed Cradled Witch. This 1-drop creature has a hybrid mana cost. It also has an activated ability for 4 mana that will untap target creature and will give it +3/+3 until the end of turn. Now honestly, this effect is really underwhelming for 4 mana. But we have some sort of 2 mana infinite mana generating combo in this deck, which I will get into whenever we get to the second card we need for this combo. Sylvan Safekeeper. This creature allows us to sacrifice lands on instant speed to give target creature Shroud. And Shroud basically means that creature can be targeted by any spells or abilities until the end of turn. Another very solid way to protect Katilda or any of our other value creatures from being removed by spot removal. And honestly, sacrificing lands in this deck isn't isn't that big of a deal anyways. Because once you have like 6, 7, 8 humans on the board, you will be able to produce enough mana to play the cards in your hand, and you don't even need your lands anymore. Ulvenwald Tracker. For 2 mana and tapping this creature, we get to pick a creature we control, and that creature fights a creature we don't control. And this ability essentially allows us to pinpoint remove any problematic creatures our opponents control. We do play a ton of ways in this deck to buff up our human creature bodies, and you will always have a huge creature body on the battlefield to fight with. And if you are playing against decks that are really focused around their value engine commander like a Karloff, a Balin, a Krenku or whatever, Ulvenwald Tracker is the perfect way to deal with those cards. Weathered Wayfarer. For 1 white mana and tapping this creature, we get to search our library for any land card and put it into our hand. But we can only activate this ability if an opponent controls more lands than we do. Since we don't play any land acceleration in this deck, we will always have the least amount of lands on the table. So you will always be able to use this ability to just go fetch the lands out of your deck and ensure that you never miss a land drop. And the best thing about this card is the fact that it doesn't say that you have to get a basic land. You can use this effect to go fetch up any utility land you need at the given board state. You can use this to go fetch up your Cavern of Souls if you are playing against counter magic. You can go fetch up your Boseiju to deal with any enchantments or artifacts. Or you can use this to go fetch up your Egangel to deal with any problematic attacking or blocking creatures. And being able to go fetch up any of the channel lands on instant speed and allowing you to instantly use them will really catch your opponents off guard. Zac Fair, a new awesome 1-drop creature from the Final Fantasy set that will enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And for 1 generic mana and sacrificing this creature, we can give target creature indestructible until the end of turn and move all counters and equipment that Zac had equipped or on itself to the target creature. Now honestly, we don't really care about the +1/+1 counter being moved or the ability to move equipment, but it will give another layer of protection we can use to protect Katilda. Katilda Commando. For 1 generic mana, we can sacrifice this creature to destroy any target artifact or enchantment on the battlefield. An additional human body that allows us to deal with any problematic cards our opponents might have on the battlefield, be it a Ghostly Prison, a Phyrexian Altar, an Aura Shards. And thanks to Katilda, you can actually tap this creature to pay for the mana cost of its own ability. Cloud, Midgar Mercenary. Whenever this human enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for any equipment card and put it into our hand, essentially giving us a free Steel Shaper's Gift whenever we play it. Now we're not some sort of an equipment deck by any means, but we do play 2 really important pieces of equipment in this deck, and Cloud is just the perfect tutor for them. I will be going more in depth into Cloud and his synergies in this deck whenever I get to the equipment we actually want to tutor up with him. Coppercoat Vanguard, the only sort of human lord we play in this deck. This creature will give every human you control +1 power, and it will also give them Ward 1. Now the +1 power is a nice little stat boost that might be really relevant later in the game when you are setting up for some lethal swings at your opponents. Because whenever you have like 10 humans on the board, this little ability will actually give a +10 total power boost. But the main reason this card is included in the deck is because he gives the ward mechanic to all our other humans. Now Ward 1 might not seem like that important of an ability, but actually having your opponents have to pay 1 additional mana to target your creatures is a pretty big deal in some games. Every card that makes our opponents have to spend more mana to deal with our board makes their game plan way less efficient. Duskwatch Recruiter, the 2 mana variant of Recruitment Officer. We can activate this ability for 3 mana to look at the top 3 cards of our library. Then from amongst those cards we get to pick 1 creature card and put it into our hand. This is just a fantastic mana sink ability. If you do have some mana left over and no other cards to play in your hand, you can just activate this ability a couple of times and just refuel on humans and keep the human storm going. At the beginning of each upkeep, this card will check if no spells were cast on the previous turn. If no spells were cast, this card will flip into its backside, which is a werewolf creature that will reduce the cost of any creature we play by 1 generic mana. The backside of this card really isn't the reason why the card is included in the deck, but if your opponents do decide to screw with your game plan and make it flip into its backside so it's not actually a human anymore, I suppose the cost reduction can be a really nice thing to play even more humans. And at the beginning of each upkeep, if 2 or more spells were cast on the the previous turn, it will just flip back into its front side, which is something you can easily accomplish in this type of deck to just cast 2 or more humans in a single turn to get your valuable human creature back. Spectacular Spider-Man. My personal favorite card we got in the entire Spider-Man set. It's a 2-mana flash creature that has 2 activated abilities. For 1 generic mana, we can give this creature flying until the end of turn, allowing us to sneak some combat damage through if we want. But the best part about this card is its second ability. For 1 generic mana and sacrificing this creature, each other creature we control will get hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Not only can you use this ability to protect Katilda from being removed by spot removal, but whenever an opponent is playing a board wipe, you can just sacrifice Spider-Man and all your humans will survive. I'm really convinced that this card will become a staple in a ton of commander decks. The value on this card is just way too good. Sunstrike Legionnaire, a 2-mana human that won't untap during our untap steps, but whenever any other creature enters the battlefield, it will untap itself. Whenever you have Katilda on the battlefield, this creature will tap for 1 white mana. You can just tap this creature, use the mana to play another creature, and this creature will untap itself, allowing you to tap it again to generate even more mana. It will allow us to keep the mana flowing and keep playing humans back to back. Fun little fact, whenever your opponents play a creature, this card will also untap, so you get like an additional blocker or an additional mana during your opponent's turns of it. Dahlia, Guardian of Traben. For as long as this creature is on the battlefield, every non-creature spell will cost 1 generic mana more to cast. This effect might sound really boring, but it is one of the most impactful abilities in this entire deck. The amount of scenarios where this card generates you an absurd amount of value is just ridiculous. If you're playing against an artifact player that wants to chain a ton of cheap artifacts back to back, they will now have to pay 1 mana more for each of those artifacts. If you're playing against a big dragon deck, every acceleration spell or mana rock they play will now cost them 1 mana more. If someone is trying to cast a board wipe or spot removal on any of your creatures, it will cost them 1 mana more to do so, delaying it by a turn. And if you're playing at more competitive tables and opponents are trying to combo off with like an Underworld Breach and a Lotus Petal, this card just stops the entire combo. And there are probably like a million more examples of how good this effect really is. Now obviously this sort of stacks effect doesn't only apply to our opponents. All of our non-creature spells will also cost us 1 generic mana more, but we do play a total of 47 creatures and we will always have access to a huge amount of mana anyways, thanks to Katilda and all of our humans. Voice of Victory. This card is basically the improved Tarkir Dragonstorm version of Grand Abolisher, and its ability is really simple. Your opponents can cast spells during your turn. So whenever you have this creature on the field, you can just do your thing during your own turn, get into combat, and you won't have to worry about your opponents actually interacting with you. And if you play in a pot with a ton of instant speed interaction or board wipes, this effect is really relevant. It also has the Mobilize 2 mechanic, meaning whenever this creature attacks, you get to create 2 1/1 red warrior tokens that are also tapped and attacking. Honestly, not the most relevant ability in this deck because the creature tokens it creates aren't actually humans. Boromir, Warden of the Tower. This 3 mana vigilance body will counter any spell that your opponents cast whenever they didn't pay any mana for it. If you're playing against a deck that relies on cheating out an omniscience and making every spell cost in their deck free, they're now just completely locked out of the game. If your opponents are casting any of the spells that cost 0 mana whenever you control your commander, they will now just be countered, and it will just prevent your opponents from using any cards with an alternate free mana cost like a Force of Will or an Endurance. This is a really oppressive effect that can shut down entire decks. And on top of that, Boromir has a second ability which is arguably even better for this type of deck. On instant speed, we can sacrifice Boromir to give all creatures we control indestructible until the end of turn. Like I already mentioned, the biggest downside to this type of deck is that we are really vulnerable to board wipes, and Boromir is the perfect way to protect every creature we have on the board from any sort of removal or wipes. Cosmogrant Zenith. A really strong and potent new card we just got in the Edge of Eternity set. Whenever we cast our second spell during any given turn, we get to pick one out of two fantastic options. The first option allows us to generate two 1/1 human tokens, which is just perfect for this deck because it will trigger any of our human synergies, and these tokens can be tapped thanks to Katilda to produce us mana. And the second effect allows us to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, which you can use later in the game whenever you have an army of humans to just buff them up and go for a lethal swing. And a really cool thing you can do is just cast this card as your first spell of the turn, then follow up with any other spell and you'll instantly get a trigger out of her. It doesn't even matter that this card didn't even see you casting the first spell. Cosmogrant Zenith is just a fantastic card you can include in any sort of human or token deck. The value on both abilities is just crazy. Heronblade Elite, a 3-mana vigilance body that has exactly the same first ability as a champion of the parish. Whenever any human creature enters the battlefield under your control, this creature will get a +1/+1 counter. This creature can also be tapped to add X mana of any color to your mana pool. X being the power of this creature. And as you can imagine, with the amount of humans we're playing in this deck, the power of this creature can get out of control really quickly, which then in turn will allow you to produce an insane amount of mana. Now, as I mentioned when I was talking about Seed Cradle Witch earlier in the video, we do play one combo in this deck that will generate us infinite mana. And for this infinite combo to happen, you will only need 3 things. You will need a Heronblade Elite on the battlefield, you will need a Seed Cradle Witch on the battlefield, and you will need 3 mana available to pay for Seed Cradle Witch's ability. Let's assume the Heronblade Elite has 0 counters and is at 1 power. You can then just tap the Heronblade Elite and add 3 mana from any other sources to your mana pool. You can then use the 4 mana produced to activate Seed Cradle Witch's ability. You will target the Heronblade Elite and she will get +3/3 and you will get to untap her. Then you will get to tap the Heronblade Elite again and you can use that 4 mana produced to activate Seed Cradle Witch's ability. This will untap the Heronblade Elite, she will now be at 7 power and now you can tap her to add 7 mana to your mana pool. And you can repeat this process an infinite amount of times and you will be able to generate infinite green, infinite white mana, and Heronblade Elite will be at infinite power and toughness. And in this deck we do have a couple of outs that I already mentioned in this video for the infinite mana. With cards like Recruitment Officer or a Duskwatch Recruiter, you can just use the mana to activate their abilities infinite times and draw every creature in your entire deck, which you then will also be instantly able to play since you do have infinite mana. You can also use Seed Cradle Witch's ability to buff up your entire board to infinite power and infinite toughness and just go for a lethal swing. Loran of the Third Path. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. Another fantastic way to deal with any problematic cards that your opponents might have on the table. You can also tap Loran to make target player and yourself draw a card. As you've seen by now, generating mana in this deck will never be a problem. The problem actually is that you will run out of cards in your hand, so we do need a ton of card draw options. And Loran just provides that. And since we are some sort of a storm deck, we will usually get more value out of the 1 card we draw than any of our opponents. Loran also has Vigilance, meaning we can attack with her first and then tap her to either draw a card or generate us mana with Katilda. Moonblast Cleric. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for any enchantment card and put it on top, essentially functioning as an enlightened tutor on a human stick. And as you will see later in the card draw and support section, we do play a ton of really impactful enchantments in this deck, and we really do need ways to go fetch them up. And I'd honestly play this card over an enlightened tutor in this type of deck any day of the week, because it does give us an additional human body we can tap for mana thanks to Katilda, and it will trigger all of the other human synergies we play in this deck. Ranger Captain of Eos. Whenever this human enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for any creature card with converted mana cost 1 and put it straight into our hand, allowing us to get another creature into our hand and just keep the creature storm going. And as you've seen earlier in this video, we do play a ton of really impactful 1-drops in this deck. You can go fetch up your Seed Cradle Witch to set up the 2-card combo. You can go fetch up a Planar Guide to protect your board from being wiped. You can go fetch up your Esper Sentinel to get some card draw, or you can go get your Elven Wall Tracker if you do need some removal. And we can also sacrifice this creature to prevent our opponents from casting non-creature spells this turn. If you're playing against combo players like Underworld Breach and Lotus Petal, for example, you can just sacrifice this creature and they can't win the game anymore. Or you can just sacrifice this creature during an opponent's upkeep if you think they're about to cast a board wipe to prevent that from happening. Just keep in mind your opponents can actually respond to this ability with any instant speed non-creature spells. So if your opponents have any instant speed removal spells or board wipes and they do have the mana open, they can actually still cast them in response to this. Recruiter of the Guard, a 3 mana human body that will allow us to tutor up any creature from our deck to our hand with toughness 2 or less. This card essentially reads go tutor up any creature in your deck, because 95% of the creatures in this deck actually have lower than 2 toughness. And it also tutors straight to your hand, which is just perfect to keep chaining creatures back to back. Most of the win cons we play in this deck can actually be fetched up by this card. A Champion of Lambhold, a Gold Knight Commander, Kyler, and obviously you can also use this effect to go fetch up the pieces for the 2-card combo I explained earlier in the video. Torrens, Fist of the Angels, a 3 mana Selesnya creature that whenever we cast a creature spell will generate us a 1/1 green and white human token. With the amount of cheap creatures we run and will be casting in this deck, Torrens is just one of the best token generators in the entire deck. And not only does he generate us a really solid army of human bodies, but thanks to Katilda, these tokens will also be able to be tapped for mana. And since these tokens are both green and white, they are just perfect for helping us fix our colors. On top of that, the tokens and Torrens himself also have the training mechanic, meaning whenever these creatures attack together with a creature with greater power, these training creatures will get a +1/+1 counter. Later in the game, whenever you are going for that lethal swing, you will always be swinging with at least 1 big creature, and all the training creatures will have 2 power instead of the 1, which might be really relevant in some games and allow you to deal a ton of extra damage. If you can resolve a Torrens early in the game and your opponents have no way to deal with either him or Katilda, the amount of human tokens and mana this dude will generate you is absolutely ridiculous and will usually end up with a game win. Veteran Beast Rider. Whenever this creature is on the battlefield at the beginning of your end step, you will get to untap all creatures you control. In this type of deck, we will be really vulnerable most of the time, because on most turns we will be tapping all our humans to generate mana and we won't have any blockers left. Thanks to this creature, you get to untap all your creatures before you go to an opponent's turn, and you will have a way to chum block any big attackers your opponents might have. And obviously getting an additional untap on all of your humans will enable you to produce a huge amount of mana, which can be used during an opponent's turn to activate cards like Recruitment Officer or Duskvale Recruiter to just refill your hand with a ton of humans and just set up for a really huge storm turn on the next turn. This creature also has an activated ability for 4 mana that will give all creatures you control +1/+1 until the end of turn. Later in the game, when you do have a ton of humans on the board and you do have 1,000,000 mana available to you, you can just use this ability a couple of times, buff up your board and set up for a lethal swing. Now that we're talking about untap effects, Village Bell Ringer. Whenever this 3 mana creature enters the battlefield, we get to untap all creatures we control. And what this essentially does is allow you to tap all your creatures for mana, flash this creature in by using the mana, untap all your creatures, and you will be able to produce double the mana, allowing you to set up for some really big acceleration turns and just pump out your win conditions and take over the game. On top of that, this card also has the flash mechanic, which you can utilize to untap your creatures during an opponent's turn to just surprise your opponents, or to untap your creatures and get some chum blockers available to you. Now, if you really want to include combos in this deck, you can also include Emil the Blessed, which is essentially a 2-card infinite combo when you combine him with Village Bellringer. I decided to exclude the combo because I really don't like 2-card combos. Also, Emil is a unicorn and in my opinion he just doesn't fit in a human deck. Captain Sissy! For 4 mana you get a legendary creature tutor on a human body. You can just tap Sissy, search your library for any legendary card and put it into your hand. Which is an excellent way to just keep your hand filled to keep the creature storm going and to just go fetch up any specific legendary you need at the given board state. You can use it to go fetch up your Spider-Man for protection, you can go fetch up your Kyler as a win con, you can go fetch up a Lauren if you need to deal with any artifacts or enchantments. Sissy is just fantastic. And she also doesn't state legendary creature, you can use it to go fetch up any legendary card in the deck. You can use her to go fetch up any of the channel lands for some instant speed interaction. You can go fetch up your Yavimaya if you need some color fixing. You can even use it to go fetch up your Gorn of Hondor to just create an insanely big army of humans. Sissy is just a really crazy value creature that we can get out really early thanks to Katilda. Ranger of Eos, which is almost the same card as the Ranger Captain of Eos. Instead of just tutoring up one 1-drop creature from our deck, this creature will get us 2 of those. And paying 4 mana for a creature that will essentially draw you into 2 new 1-drop humans is just some really absurd value. And you can get some really interesting creature combos with this one. My favorite combo being an Ulvenwald Tracker and a Serra Ascendant, which on the next turn will allow you to start fighting with the Serra Ascendant, pinpoint removing any threats on the field and gaining you a ton of life in the process thanks to the lifelink. And obviously you can also go fetch up any of your protection pieces, card draw pieces, or even combo pieces. Before making this deck, I didn't even realize how many awesome human cards existed. RIP. Spawn Hunter, a 4 mana human creature from the Duskmourn set with the survival mechanic, meaning at the beginning of your second main phase, if this creature is tapped, its ability will trigger, allowing us to look at the top X cards of our library and reveal X creature or vehicle cards with different powers from amongst them and put them directly into our hand. So whenever we swing with this creature, or more importantly, whenever we tap it for mana thanks to Katilda, we will get to draw an immense amount of cards of this. In my experience, whenever I was playing this deck, RIP will draw you at least 2 cards every trigger. RIP is a really interesting card, but in most decks is just really weak because you have to swing with it and it actually has to survive combat. But in this deck, we don't even have to swing with it. We can just tap it for mana to get a trigger out of its ability, it will be fine and it will generate us an insane amount of card advantage. Silk, Web Weaver, a new card from the Spider-Man set that has 3 really relevant abilities for this type of deck. First up, it has the web slinging mechanic, meaning instead of paying the usual 4 mana cost to cast this creature, we can return any tapped creature we control to our hand and this creature will only cost us 3 mana. And since we can easily tap any of our creatures whenever we want thanks to Katilda, you will always be able to cast this creature for its web slinging cost and just return the creature you used to tap for mana for this creature to your hand. And returning a creature to your hand in this deck is actually a good thing, because you then will be able to instantly cast that creature again and trigger any human synergies or ETB abilities we have in this deck. Like for example, Silk's next ability. Whenever we cast a creature spell, we get to generate a 1/1 green and white human token. Perfect for when you just returned a human to your hand with the web slinging. Just cast it again and you will instantly have an additional human body that you can tap for mana on a later turn. And like I already mentioned when I was talking about Torrens, who has exactly the same ability, generating green and white human tokens on creature cost is just insane in this deck, because we will be casting a ton of creatures and this ability will generate you an army of humans that you can either use to tap for an insane amount of mana or that you can use later in the game to set up for a lethal swing. And it doesn't even stop there, because Silk has an additional activated ability. For 5 mana, you get to give every creature you control Vigilance until the end of turn and a +2/+2 stat boost, which you can use later in the game when you have 1,000,000 mana available to buff up all the tokens you just generated with Silk, give them Vigilance and set up for a lethal swing. And the Vigilance is really relevant because you can swing with the creatures, they will still be untapped and you you will be able to use them for mana after the swing. Witch Enchanter, a 4 mana 2/2 human creature that whenever it enters a battlefield allows you to destroy any target artifact or enchantment. Another card that just allows us to blow up any enchantments or artifacts that we don't like, and if you don't need the additional body, you can just play the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for 1 white mana, and you can even make it enter untapped for the low cost of 3 life. Like I mentioned in all my videos, there really is no reason you shouldn't play these MDFC lands in any of your decks. You can just play them as a land or as a beneficial effect. And the last card in this section is Reverent Hoplite. For 5 mana, you get a 1/2 human creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will generate you X 1/1 white human soldier tokens. X being your devotion to white, aka the amount of white mana pips you have in permanents you control. And if you remember, at the beginning of this section, I mentioned how it is really easy to get to 5 mana as early as turn 3 thanks to Katilda. Usually whenever you then drop a Reverent Hoplite, it will generate you like 3 extra human tokens, allowing you on turn 4 to untap with like 9 or 10 mana available to you, which is absolutely crazy. If you're enjoying these in-depth deck tech videos and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. You'll get early access to the deck lists of these videos before they even go live, and you will get access to exclusive Discord chat rooms where I share a ton of behind the scenes stuff. What decks I'm currently working on, what decks that I made and I actually scrapped because I couldn't make them work, and you'll also get a behind the scenes look of my thought process whilst I'm brewing these awesome decks. And at the highest tier, you can even submit your deck for a personal review by me. So if you want to help me keep making these awesome in-depth deck tech videos every single week and you want to join the community, click the join button below the video or check out the link in the description below. And a big thanks to all the current YouTube members. Thanks to you, I can keep doing what I love doing most, making really awesome decks. Next up, we have the card draw section. Since our commander is already turning our entire board into mana dorks, the only thing that can really slow us down is running out of cards to play. And that's where the cards in this section come in. These are the card draw engines that will keep our hand full and keep the creature storm going. Esper Sentinel. Now I know Esper Sentinel is a boring staple card that almost any white deck runs nowadays. And while I think this card should be turned into a game changer or just straight up be banned in the format, it is the perfect card for this type of deck, because the value this card's ability will generate you over the course of a game is absolutely insane. Whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell in a turn, they have to pay X. X being Esper Sentinel's power. When they don't, we get to draw a card. Now obviously an Esper Sentinel just being at 1 power is already really good, because no one likes paying additional mana to just be able to cast their spells. In most games, every turn cycle, an Esper Sentinel just being on the battlefield will already draw you like 1 or 2 cards, which is already pretty crazy for just a 1-drop creature. But if you do have cards like a Coppercoat Vanguard on the battlefield that will boost Esper Sentinel's power, your opponents won't ever be able to pay the additional mana cost for their spells, making it even better in this type of human deck. I know we've already been over some really insane 1-drop creatures, but Esper Sentinel is arguably the best 1-drop creature in this entire deck. And that is because it solves the biggest problem in Selesnya colors, and that is drawing cards. Skull Clamp. This classic 1 mana equipment can be equipped to any creature for 1 mana, and it will give it +1 power and -1 toughness. And whenever the equipped creature dies, we get to draw 2 cards. Now obviously a Skull Clamp in a human deck that plays a ton of 1 toughness creatures and generates a ton of 1/1 tokens is already an auto include, because essentially this card just reads 1 generic mana and draw 2 cards, which is the best deal you'll ever get. And because Skull Clamp's effect is this good, that is also the reason why I decided to include Cloud in the deck, so we actually have a way to go fetch it up. And since Cloud is a 1 toughness creature that will double the triggers of any equipment equipped to him, whenever you equip the Skull Clamp to Cloud, you will actually get to draw 4 cards. So whenever you play Cloud, you can just go fetch up the Skull Clamp and just refill your entire hand. And you will still have an intact Skull Clamp on the battlefield that will draw you even more cards over the course of the game. Rite of Harmony, a 2 mana instant speed spell that will draw you a card whenever a creature or enchantment enters the battlefield this turn. The amount of card draw that this card will generate you on a turn that you are able to storm off and play like 5 creatures is absolutely insane. Like I mentioned, generating 5 mana with Katilda as early as turn 3 is a really easy thing to do. If you then are able to just play a Rite of Harmony, follow up with like 3 creatures, you will get to draw 3 cards of that, which on the next turn will enable you to play even more creatures. And later in the game, whenever you do have a million mana available to you, just start off your turn by playing a Rite of Harmony, follow up with a gazillion humans, and you will be able to draw your entire deck of this effect. And it scales incredibly well with some of the token generating creatures we play in this deck, like a Torrens or a Silk. And this card also has the flashback mechanic for 4 mana, meaning after you've cast this card, you can just cast it again and get a second use out of it later in the game. Rite of Harmony is one of my personal favorite cards, and it is really underrated in my opinion. Sylvan Library, the best green card draw enchantment ever printed. Now this card's ability is worded in a pretty weird way, so let me just make it really simple for you. At the beginning of your draw step, you get to draw 2 additional cards. When you do, you have to choose 2 cards that you drew this turn and put them back on top of your library, unless you pay 4 life per card. This card essentially reads draw 3 cards per turn but lose 8 life. Now just getting to triple up on your card draw every single turn on just a 2 mana enchantment is really crazy. And life is a resource anyways. I know 8 life might seem like a lot, but we do start at 40 life anyways in Commander, so usually it won't really matter. And later in the game, if you are under a ton of pressure and you don't have the life to pay for this effect, it is an optional effect and you don't have to draw those extra cards. Realm Walker. This card is a 3 mana changeling, meaning it has every creature type, including human. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we have to choose a creature type. Obviously, we will be naming human. And for as long as this card is on the battlefield, we get to look at the top card of our library at any given time. And we also get to cast creature spells of the chosen type straight from the top of our library. While this effect isn't directly a card draw effect, it will give us card advantage by essentially giving us 1 additional card in our hand, being the top card of our library. And this synergizes really well with cards like Recruitment Officer because they allow us to actually manipulate the top cards of our library. If you see that you don't have a human on top and you're not able to cast a spell, just activate the Recruitment Officer, the top card of your deck will change, and hopefully you now get a human that you can actually cast from the top. And a really similar card is Augur of Autumn. This card allows us to cast creatures from the top of our library as long as we have the Coven mechanic active. Coven basically means we need to control at least 3 creatures with different powers. And since in this deck most creatures have different powers anyways, we will have Coven active 90% of the time. And this card is actually better than Realm Walker because this card also allows us to play land cards from the top of our library. So if we have a land card on top, we can just play it. Hopefully the next card is a creature spell and we can just keep chaining cards straight from the top of our deck, giving us some crazy pseudo card advantage. Lifecrafter's Bestiary, a simple 3 mana artifact that at the beginning of our upkeep allows us to scry 1, which in some cases might be really relevant. You can just look at the top card of your library. If it for example is a land which you don't need at this given board state, just scry to the bottom, and if you're lucky you will get a usable spell on top. But the main reason why it's included in the deck is whenever we cast a creature spell, we get the ability to pay 1 additional green mana and we get to draw a card. Paying extra mana in this deck will never be a problem once you have your board filled with humans. And since the entire point of this deck is just casting as many cheap creature spells as possible, just using any leftover mana you have will result in this little artifact drawing you a ton of cards. Mentor of the Meek. I really like to view this card as a Lifecrafter's Bestiary attached to a human body, because whenever another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under our control, we get the ability to pay 1 generic mana. When we do, we get to draw a card. Another way to turn any leftover mana we have into additional card draw, and a way to just keep the creature storm going and keep growing our board. This card also scales incredibly well with any of our token generators, because unlike Lifecrafter's Bestiary, this card doesn't trigger on creature cast. It actually triggers whenever a creature enters the battlefield, making it way better. Wily Duke. Atin Hero, a 3-mana creature that whenever it becomes tapped will gain us 1 life and draw us a card. This card is usually used to saddle or crew vehicles to get really easy card draw triggers of that, but in this Katilda deck it just turns into a really solid mana dork that will give us really consistent card draw. Guardian Project, a 4-mana enchantment that will essentially draw us a card whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control. Now while this in my opinion is one of the least efficient card draw engines in the entire deck, whenever you are able to get this card out as early as turn 3, trust me, you will have a really good time. It will turn every creature you cast into some sort of a cantrip, making all of them replace themselves by drawing you new cards. And Guardian Project also has a really cool synergy with Planar Guide, because Planar Guide will blink all creatures, and whenever they re-enter the battlefield, you will get to draw a ton of cards of the Guardian Project. Slate of Ancestry, by far my favorite draw engine in the entire deck. For 4 mana and tapping this artifact, you get to discard your hand, and then you get to draw a card for each creature you control. And when I tell you the value this card will generate you is totally out of control, it would be an understatement. Now for most decks, playing a 4-mana artifact that also requires an investment of 4 mana is just way too slow. But usually in this type of deck we can get it out really early and we can get activations out of it as early as turn 5. And by turn 5 we will control somewhere between 5 to 10 humans. Usually when we get to that point our hand will be almost empty anyways because all our creatures will already be on the battlefield, and whenever we then activate this card we'll just have to discard 1 card to draw 10 new ones. And it's not just a one-time effect, you can keep repeating this every turn again and again as long as your opponents don't have an answer to this. And let's be honest, drawing about 10 to 15 new cards every single turn in this cheap human storm deck is a pretty crazy thing, right? And the last card in this section is Spider UK. It's a 4-mana creature that you can web sling in for just 3 mana, meaning that to get this cost reduction you will have to return a tapped creature to your hand. And like with all the web slinging cards, returning a creature to your hand is actually a benefit, because at the beginning of your end step, this creature will check if 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn. If you meet this requirement, you will get to draw a card and gain 2 life. And usually what this looks like in a game of Magic is you just tap a 1-drop to pay for the web slinging cost of this card, return the 1-drop to your hand, play the Spider UK. Usually you will then have 1 mana left, you just recast a 1-drop, 2 creatures enter the battlefield, and you will already get to draw a card of this effect. Next up we have the win conditions. The massive amount of mana we can produce and our army of humans on the board eventually have to go somewhere. The cards in this section allow us to convert our human count and our mana into an actual game win. Be it to massive buffs to our board, making everything unblockable, or just setting up for a really big swing that will take all your opponents out of the game at once. Champion of Lambhold. If you didn't know about this little 3-drop creature yet, I'm about to blow your mind. Let's start by talking about its second ability. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambhold, making this card essentially an improved version of Champion of the Parish, because it won't only trigger of human creatures, but of any creature that enters. And like you've already seen in the video, we will be playing about 7 million creatures every single turn, so it will be really easy to get this creature up to huge amounts of power. That in itself is already really solid, but it's all about the first ability that synergizes perfectly with this power boost. Creatures that have less power than Champion of Lambhold won't be able to block any creature you control. Yeah, read the card again, I didn't make a mistake. It won't only make Champion of the Lambhold unblockable, but it will make your entire board unblockable. Let's say you are able to get this creature to 10 power thanks to its second ability. Only creatures with 10 or bigger power will now be able to block all of the humans you control. And the chances your opponents control 10 power creatures are really slim. And just being able to swing your massive army at your opponents without even having to worry about them being blocked and losing them into combat is an insane thing and will just win you the game on the spot. Champion of Lambhold is a really good win condition in most creature-based decks, and it comes at a low cost of only 3 mana. Gold Knight Commander. This 4-mana creature will give all your creatures +1/+1 until the end of the turn whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your your control. This ability makes it really easy to just buff up your board and threat a lethal on each of your opponents, be it by creating a ton of tokens with Irreverent Hoplite, casting a couple of spells with a Silk or a Torrents on the battlefield, or just by chaining some of your 1-drop human creatures back to back. Gold Knight Commander is just a common card, but it can really catch your opponents off guard. Coat of Arms. This 5 mana artifact will give each creature +1/1 for each other creature in play that has the same type. Let's say you have 11 humans on the board, which is really not that hard at all to do in this deck. Coat of Arms will now give all 11 of those creatures a +10/+10 stat boost, resulting in a total +110 power and +110 toughness for your entire board, which will easily translate into a free game win. Just be warned, Coat of Arms' effect isn't just a one-sided thing, it also counts for your opponents. So if you're playing against another tribal player, like a goblin player for example, you will also give them a huge stat boost. And because a ton of staple cards have the human archetype, you will also be boosting your opponent's humans. Just keep this in mind before you drop your Coat of Arms and actually lose the game to an opponent's 15/15 Esper Sentinel swinging at you. And a really similar card to Coat of Arms is Banner of Kinship. Whenever this artifact enters the battlefield, we have to choose a creature type. This creature will then enter the battlefield with 1 fellowship counter for each creature of the chosen type you control. And then it will give creatures of the chosen type +1/+1 for each fellowship counter this artifact has on itself. So whenever you drop this with 8 humans on the board, it will give +8/+8 to all of your humans for the remainder of the game. And this time it is a one-sided effect, so you won't actually be buffing up your opponent's creatures. Kyler, Sigardian Emissary, one of the most popular human commanders in the format, and for good reason, because this card is by far one of the best win cons in any sort of human tribal deck. For 5 mana you get a 2/2 human creature that will get a +1/+1 counter whenever a human enters the battlefield under your control. Same effect as a Champion of the Parish, but Kyler will also give +1/+1 to each other human you control for every counter he has on himself. It won't be hard to cast a couple of humans and get like 10 counters on Kyler and get a massive stat boost for your entire army. And my favorite thing about Kyler is that you can drop him as early as turn 3. If your opponents have no way to answer this, you can just keep chaining humans and you will have a massive board by turn 5, and usually you can just win the game that early. Kamal, Fist of Kroza, a 6 mana 4/3 human with 2 activated abilities. And let's start by talking about the most impactful one. For 5 mana you can give all creatures you control +3/+3 and trample until the end of turn, essentially acting as some sort of an overrun effect. The previous win cons, they don't actually give trample. So no matter if you control 10, 100 humans, as long as your opponents have like 1/1 squirrels tokens to chum block them, you can't actually win the game. And Kamal's trample really solves that problem. 5 mana might seem like a really steep mana cost, but in this deck, mana will never be a problem. And the last win condition in this deck, and you probably could have seen it coming from a mile away, Craterhoof Behemoth, a massive 8 mana 5/5 haste creature that's used in many decks to close out games. Whenever Craterhoof Behemoth enters the battlefield, he will give all your creatures +XX and trample, X being the amount of creatures you control. And like in all creature and creature token based decks, Craterhoof is just an absolute powerhouse, because usually whenever you cast this, you will control between 10 to 15 creatures, give 15 power to your entire board, and you will just be able to close out the game on the spot. And thanks to the trample it gives to your entire board, your opponents won't actually be able to chum block your creatures. And my favorite part about Craterhoof in this deck is just the fact how early you can get it out with Katilda and set up for a lethal turn. Before we continue, I want to share something with you. Shaddington in my Discord server actually mapped out every color combination I already did a deck tag about on this channel. And when I saw this graph, I realized how uneven my color coverage really is. Apparently I've done 4 Selesnya decks, but I didn't even cover a single Rakdos, Dimir or Golgari deck. So yeah, I guess it's time to show some love to the color pairs I haven't done yet. Going forward, I'll be trying to fill in all of the colors I haven't covered yet, so I have at least one deck in every color combination. That way, no matter what color combo you like to play, there will be a video on the channel for you. And according to these numbers, I am a little biased towards red and white cards. Next up, we have the support section. The cards in this section tie everything together. They are the support pieces that make this deck work. Most of these cards aren't flashy, but once you get your engine online, they will provide you with some insane value. Concordant Crossroads. This 1-mana enchantment will give every creature haste. Now the reason why this card is included in the deck is because it really is the perfect storm enabler for this deck. Because usually whenever you tap your humans for mana and you just play new humans, you have to wait a turn until they don't have summoning sickness anymore to be able to tap them for more mana. Whenever you are able to give your creatures haste, you can just tap a human, play another human, and you will instantly be able to utilize the new human you just played for even more mana. And this just plays perfectly into our storm playstyle. Because let's say for example you just cast a Rite of Harmony, you can just cast a human, draw a card, tap the human you just cast, play a new human, draw another card, and you can just keep the value chain going. Now I know it might seem scary giving haste to all creatures, including the ones your opponents control, but unless you play in a really aggressive creature based pot, it won't actually matter that much. Whenever we play our Moonblast Clerics, 95% of the time we will be using it to go fetch up Concordant Crossroads, because this enchantment is just way too good in the deck. Lightning Greaves, a classic 2-mana equipment you can equip for 0 mana, and it will give the equipped creature Shroud and haste. And this card is essentially the same card as Concordant Crossroads, but this time it is a one-sided effect and won't give your opponent's creatures haste. Because whenever you play a human, you can just equip this card for 0 mana, the human will get haste, you will be able to tap it for mana, play a new human, just attach the boots to the new human, and you will instantly be able to use all your humans for mana the turn they come down thanks to the boots. And obviously after that you just attach it to Katilda to prevent her from being targeted by removal. Lightning Greaves is the second equipment in this deck we can go fetch up with Cloud, because we really want to get haste on our board. This deck is a really solid 9 out of 10 without having haste, but whenever you can give your humans haste and tap them instantly, it goes to an 11 out of 10. Nature's Rhythm. For 2 mana plus X, you get to search your library for any creature card with mana value X or less and put it straight onto the battlefield. Just a classic tutor you can use to tutor up any creature you need at a given board state, or just to go fetch up any of your win conditions. And on top of that, and also the reason why I decided to include this card over a classic card like a Chord of Calling, is the fact that this card has the Harmonize mechanic. Meaning whenever it is in your graveyard, similar like a flashback mechanic, you can pay 4 green mana plus X and just cast the spell again, getting a second use out of the effect. And the Harmonize mechanic also allows us to tap a creature whenever we cast this, and the generic mana cost will be reduced by X. X being that creature's power. So whenever you have like a 10/10 Champion of the Parish on the battlefield, you can just tap it and you will be able to get your biggest creatures out of your deck for just a low cost of 4 mana. Harvest Season, a 3-mana sorcery that allows us to search our library for X basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. X being the amount of tapped creatures we control. Now since Katilda gives us the ability to tap our creatures whenever we want, whenever we cast a spell we can just tap down our entire board, float the mana, and then this little 3-mana spell will get us a huge amount of basics from our deck straight to the battlefield. And since we are a 2-color deck, we actually do play a ton of basic lands. You can cast this really early in the game whenever you just have 3 creatures on the battlefield to go fetch up 3 basic lands, which is already a really insane acceleration spell, just paying 3 mana for 3 lands. Or later in the game when you actually have 10 creatures on the battlefield, you can use this to just go fetch all your basics out of your deck, get a huge amount of mana acceleration, and reducing the chances you will draw into basic lands later in the game, and you will actually draw some relevant cards. I've been looking through a lot of Katilda lists online and no one was playing this card, and I really don't understand why. The value is just incredible. Horn of Gondor. Whenever this 3-mana legendary artifact enters the battlefield, we get to create a 1/1 human token, which in itself is already really nice because the human it generates will essentially be a mana dork. But its activated ability is where this card goes absolutely nuts. For 3 mana and tapping this artifact, we get to generate X 1/1 human tokens, X being the amount of humans we control. And this ability is basically Krenko's ability, but instead for goblins, for humans. By the time this card comes down, you will control like 5 to 10 humans, which thanks to Katilda you can tap to pay for the mana cost of this artifact's ability and just double up on the amount of humans you have. This will not only double the size of your human army, but it will also give you a ton of human synergy triggers, and on the next turn you will be able to tap all of those human tokens for mana. This card either gives you some insane mana acceleration or some insane board presence. And since it is a legendary card, you can use Captain Sissy to just go tutor it up straight out of your deck. I wasn't really sure if I should put this card in the win condition section or the support section. 1000 Year Elixir, a 3 mana artifact that essentially allows you to tap your creatures for mana as soon as they hit the battlefield. Sort of giving them pseudo haste, but you won't be able to swing with them. Like I mentioned with Concordant Crossroads or the Lightning Greaves, haste is just absolutely busted in this deck. And for 1 mana and tapping this artifact, you get to untap target creature. The only use I can think of in this deck is combining it with Heronblade Elite to just untap it and produce even more mana. And the last card in this section is Leyline of Abundance. It's a 4 mana enchantment that whenever it is in your opening hand, you can start with it on the battlefield instead. And passively, whenever you tap a creature for mana, you get to add an additional green mana to your mana pool. And this card is just nuts. Whenever this is in your opening hand, you will be able to produce like 9 to 10 mana on turn 3 with Katilda, allowing you to just overrun the board, play one of your win cons, and you will be able to close out the game on turn 4 or 5. That being said, just hardcasting this card for 4 mana is also perfectly fine to do. I wouldn't include it just for the RNG factor of getting it in your opening hand. And on top of that, it also has an activated ability for 8 mana that will put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And this ability is just perfect when you combine it with the additional mana generation. Because whenever you have this on the battlefield, you will be able to produce a gazillion mana every single turn, and this card actually gives you an outlet for that mana, allowing you to buff up your board and set up for a lethal swing. Next up, we have the interaction and protection section. Katilda is a sort of commander that will immediately draw attention. And once your opponents see what this deck can do, they will try to remove her really fast. The cards in this section will make sure we are ready for that. We got protection spells to keep Katilda and our board safe, and a handful of key removal pieces to disrupt our opponent's game plans. Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. Both cards are 1 mana instant speed removal spells that will exile target creature. Path will give the controller of that creature a basic land in return, and Swords will gain them a small amount of life. Both these cards really are some of the most efficient removal spells ever printed, and I will be including them into any wide deck that I built, because you can't win the game if you lose the game. Heroic Intervention. For 2 mana on instant speed, you get to give all permanents you control hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Whenever Katilda enters the battlefield, she will have a huge bullseye on her back. Heroic Intervention is a 2 mana option to prevent Katilda from being targeted or removed. And whenever your opponents do decide to play one of our biggest weaknesses, being board wipes, Heroic Intervention is just the perfect way to save your board from being destroyed and to totally blow your opponents out of the water. Razorgrass Ambush. This 2 mana instant speed spell will deal 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. Now I'm gonna be honest, this kind of effect is really underwhelming, but in some cases it might be really useful to just throw a 1/1 human before an attacker an opponent controls and then use this spell to destroy the attacking creature. The main reason it is included in the deck is because you can also play the backside of this card, which essentially functions as a basic plains that can even enter the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3 life. MDFC lands like this one are just really efficient, and you should include them in all of your decks. Flawless Maneuver, a 3 mana instant speed spell that will give all creatures you control indestructible until the end of turn. But in reality, this entire deck revolves around Katilda, so we will be controlling her 99% of the time. And whenever we do actually control our commander, we can cast this spell without paying its mana cost. So even when all our humans are tapped out and all our lands are tapped, we still have an option to protect our entire board from being removed by removal or board wipes. In my opinion, all the cards that cost 0 mana whenever you control your commander are absolutely broken and should be banned in the format. That being said, this card is just way too good not to play in this type of deck. And the last card in this section is actually a board wipe of our own. Split Up. For 3 mana, you get to choose one of 2 options. You can either destroy all tapped creatures, or you can destroy all untapped creatures. Now, since Katilda gives us the ability to tap down all of our creatures whenever we want for mana, Split Up is just a fantastic one-sided board wipe. Because whenever your opponents are building their board, not really swinging at anything, and all their creatures are untapped, you can just tap all your humans, float the mana, choose to destroy all untapped creatures, and everyone's board will be wiped but yours, which will result in a huge tempo swing that your opponents might never be able to come back from, and you will just have a clear board on the next turn to just swing in with your army of humans and just close out the game. Next up, we have the lands. The mana base in this deck is really efficient, but I must admit it is on the expensive side. If you want to cut down on the price of this deck, you can easily replace some of the dual colored lands by more basic lands. The deck will still function totally fine, because thanks to Katilda, we will never have a problem in generating mana and fixing our colors. I also decided to include a few utility lands in the deck, so I'll start by going over those. Boseiju, Who Endures. This land has the channel ability, meaning whenever this card is in our hand, we can pay the channel cost and discard this card. We then get to destroy target non-basic land, artifact, or enchantment on the battlefield, and the controller of that card will get to search their library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield. Another awesome way to deal with those annoying Rhystic Studies or Smothering Tides that your opponents might be playing. And thanks to the channel abilities actually being activated abilities, your opponents won't be able to use any counter spells to stop this effect from happening. And like I already mentioned, you can use Captain Sissy or Weathered Wayfarer to just get this land onto your hand on instant speed, and you will instantly be able to channel it and remove any permanent on the battlefield you don't like. Eiganjo, Seed of the Empire, the white channel land. This card functions in the same way as Boseiju does, but this time it will deal 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. Another awesome channel land that basically has no downsides to including it in the deck, and we can go fetch it up to use its effect as some sort of additional removal in the deck. Minas Tirith. This land will enter the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. For 2 mana and tapping this land, we get to draw a card, but we can only activate this ability whenever we attack with 2 or more creatures this turn. The biggest downside to being in Selesnya colors is the fact that we don't have access to good card draw, so we really do need to play every source of card draw we can get in this deck. You can just swing in with 2 1/1 human creature tokens to activate this land and get additional card draw, ensuring you will never ever run out of gas in this deck. 3/3 City. Whenever this land enters a battlefield, you have to choose a creature type. Then for 2 mana and tapping this land, we get to choose a color. Then we get to add mana to our mana pool in that color equal to the amount of creatures we control with the chosen creature type. And this is just an auto-include land in any sort of tribal deck, because from the moment you control 4 or more humans, this land will actually tap for more than 2 mana. And usually in the games I played with this deck, whenever I had a 3/3 village on the battlefield, it tapped for at least 5 to 10 mana, which is a pretty good deal on a land that doesn't even enter the battlefield tapped. And for the regular mana producing lands in this deck, we play a Bond land, a Dual Face land, a Pain land, a Cavern of Souls, a Command Tower, one of the Horizon lands, a Verge land, a Prismatic Vista, a Fast land, a Secluded Courtyard, an Unclaimed Territory, a Shock land, a Fetch land, a Yavimaya, a Filter land, and for basics we play 7 plains and 4 forests. And that's it for my in-depth Katilda Dawnhart Prime deck. And let me tell you, this deck is an absolute blast to pilot. Fast, explosive, and packed with synergy from the early game to the late game. The amount of value you can start generating in this deck from as early as turn 3 is absolutely ridiculous, and it will totally blow your mind. If you're new to the channel, I've got a ton more of these awesome in-depth deck videos you can check out, ranging anywhere from mono blue decks to 5 color powerhouses. If you made it all the way to the end, comment a bald human emoji so I know you watched the entire video. And if you want to help me out, drop a like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon so you won't miss out on the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.